So let us look at this year's mains paper 2, Indian Administration 2022. So what are our first impressions about the question paper? Mostly conventional question paper, and questions are related to current affairs, most of them, as is with the practice of UPSC. The questions are always based on current affairs. Then UPSC has as usual repeated questions from the previous years also. Most of the questions were repeated from previous years. Otherwise it is not at all a difficult question paper as such, right? So let us look at the questions. Mughal administrative system was centralized despotism. Comment. This is what we kept on discussing in our classes also. It was a centralized despotism. What do you mean by that? The entire power was concentrated in the hands of the emperor, and they also have developed a tradition, Mughals, wherein emperor was treated as a god also, so that there is no question of anyone opposing the decisions of the emperor. He had legislative powers, executive powers, as well as judicial powers, and it was a completely military dominated administration, centralized. And this is what we also have said, the biggest strength of the Mughal empire was the emperor himself. As long as the emperor was strong, the empire was stable. The moment emperor had become weak, the post Aurangzeb Mughals, it led to the disintegration of the Mughal empire also. And as we have also discussed in our classes, the emperor would maintain his own army, and also they had this Munsabdari system in the empire, wherein you had rank classification, wherein the officials were given different types of ranks depending on the amount of army they had under their command. And there was no difference between civilian and army administration, because both the functions were performed by the Mansabdars only. And what is the biggest failure of Mughal empire? They could not establish institutions that can withstand individuals, and that is what exactly the Britishers also have learned as part of East India Company. They kept on transferring the officials so that none of them would become ever powerful, unlike in the Mughal empire. Britishers had learned this kind of lessons. They focused on building institutions, which was the major failure of Mughal empire, right? Ultimately, this centralized despotism was the one that led to the failure of Mughal empire. Why? Because Mughals had brought in with themselves, as we studied also, Indian as well as extra Indian elements also, especially from Arab and Persian empires, wherein the emperor was again having absolute powers, right? You have to write about all of them. The office of the district collector admirably survived the changing times from the colonialism to the present times. Comment. The previous question was also asked previously, in the sense that it was asked in the previous year's UPSC examinations. This question was also repeated from the past year's examination. The same question was repeated. The office of the district collector admirably survived the changing times from colonialism to the present times. So the question is why the situation has changed, what kind of changes have taken place, and how it has survived. That should be the crux of your answer. So when this office of a district collector had come into existence during the East India Company times, its basic objective was to collect revenue. He was known as the collector of revenue. Basic objective was to collect revenue. As we had discussed in our classes, in the Bengal province, they introduced this Jamindari system, and the entire province was divided into revenue districts. The entire province was divided into revenue districts, unlike the Mughal times, when they were military districts. And they have appointed one officer to collect the revenue, known as a district collector. Later, he was given the responsibility of maintaining law and order, maintenance of law and order also. And by the time Lord Cornwallis had come, these district collectors were called little Napoleons because they had all three powers with themselves: legislative, executive, as well as judicial powers. After that, Lord Cornwallis introduced reforms wherein the collectors were given the responsibility of only maintenance of law and order and generation of revenues. It continued till independence. After independence, they were given other responsibilities. In fact, the term collector had become misnomer. Why? Because it was decided by the government of India to stop this practice of land revenue collection. So he had become more of a giver than a collector. In spite of the number of changes that have taken place, in the office of district collector, it has survived all those changes. That shows we say that this is the most important strength of civil services in India: their flexibility. They are willing to adapt themselves. They are willing to change themselves to the changing circumstances so that they can keep themselves relevant in the changing circumstances. So after independence, between 1950s and 1990s, they were asked to perform mostly developmental and welfare functions. And at the district level, we had only bureaucracy-centric administration. We had democratic control over bureaucracy only at the central level and at the state level. But at the district level, it was only bureaucracy-centric administration. After 1990s, we have opted for liberalization, privatization, globalization. We also have opted for democratic decentralization. And both of them again had a major impact on the functioning of district collector. Right now, we say that a district collector can at best be called chief development officer or chief executive officer. Right? And it has survived. Why? Because they were willing to adapt themselves to the changing circumstances. Right now, we are living in the age of citizen-centric governance, and it is believed that district collectors are expected to act as the most important instruments to realize the objectives of citizen-centric governance. You have to talk about all of them. Next, the smooth transaction of a business in ministries and departments depend on the role played by the cabinet secretariat. Again, go back why cabinet secretariat had come into existence. 1861 Indian Councils Act had introduced a portfolio system in India, secretariat administration. This is what we have discussed also. Once a portfolio system was introduced, it becomes imperative for the Governor General to ensure coordination between all those ministries and departments. That is when Governor General's Executive Council Secretariat had come into existence. And later, in 1946, when interim government was formed, this Governor General's Executive Council Secretariat was renamed as Cabinet Secretariat. It was the most important staff organization because it was supposed to ensure coordination between the ministries and departments. The cabinet secretary would attend the meetings of the cabinet. He would prepare the agenda for the meetings of the cabinet. He would note down the discussions and deliberations made by the cabinet ministers. He would also make note of the decisions taken by the cabinet. Once the cabinet meeting is over, it is the responsibility of the cabinet secretary to inform all the ministries and departments about the decisions taken by the cabinet, the rest of the council of ministers. And he also has the responsibility to ensure coordination between the ministries and departments. Why? Because as we discussed in paper 1, there is always scope for internal inconsistency in Weberian bureaucracy. Why? Because those bureaucrats working in the ministries and departments might always give importance to the objectives of their ministries and departments than the overall goals of the government. Ministry of Environment and Forests, they only look at strict implementation of environment rules and regulations. They are not concerned about growth concerns, industrialization and infrastructure. This is where Cabinet Secretariat should come into picture. Cabinet Secretary should come into picture, hold regular meetings with the ministries and departments, and also ensure coordination between all of them. And this Cabinet Secretariat becomes much more important during a coalition government, in case of a coalition government. Why? Because in a coalition government, you're looking at ministries which are headed by ministers belonging to different political parties. They have their own ideologies. There can be scope for conflict between the ideologies. That is where again you talk about cabinet secretariat, right? You have to talk about all of them, as part of the answer. Next, the Government of India Act 1935 is the most important source of Indian Constitution. Identify its features. So, what are the important features of 1935 Government of India Act, which we have taken in our Constitution also? A federal form of government, parliamentary democracy, then independence of judiciary, then Government of India Act also had resulted in the setting up of Reserve Bank of India, central bank for the country. Then it also has led to parliamentary democracy in India, parliamentary democracy, right? Then judicial review was also part of the act. But as we said, all these features were present but not completely in our Constitution. That is what you have to write. Even the most of the features of Government of India Act were present in our Constitution, but our Constitution is radically different from Government of India Act 1935. To say that Indian Constitution is nothing but an extension of Government of India Act 1935 would be doing gross injustice to our constitutional forefathers. Why? This Government of India Act 1935 was a legislation by an imperial state for its colony. It was a legislation by an imperial state for the administration of its colony. And what is the objective of this act? To continue the imperial rule for a long period of time. The objective of this act was to continue the imperial rule for a very, very long period of time. Another important objective of this legislation is to come out with institutional mechanisms to continue economic exploitation of the country. To come out with institutional mechanisms with the objective of economic exploitation of the country. Whereas when we talk about our Constitution, first and foremost, this Constitution is framed by the people for themselves, reposing faith in their sovereignty. So obviously, both of them cannot be compared. Second, Government of India Act 1935 never had spoken about fundamental rights, which is the soul of our Constitution. At the end of the day, these fundamental rights are the soul of our Constitution. If you remember, while discussing about constitutionalism, we said that we can define constitutionalism in terms of the ability of the state to protect and promote the fundamental rights of the citizens, which is completely absent in Government of India Act 1935. Another important thing is that Government of India Act spoke about federalism. It had spoken about federalism in a very loose sense of the word federalism. The state, the central government had control over defense, external affairs and currency. The provinces were given complete freedom. Very loose federalism. Whereas our Constitution forefathers have opted for a strong unitary state. And the Government of India Act had this in a parliamentary form of democracy, but the Governor General as well as the governors in the provinces can veto any of the decisions of the legislature. Parliament was neither supreme nor sovereign. So you have to talk about all of them. Right? As you can see, the question paper is not difficult at all. Right? Yeah, you have to identify the features which are part of Government of India Act 1935, which are there in our Constitution, and then what are the differences also you have to speak about. We did not blindly copy all those features. The Chief Secretary is the chief communication link between the state and central government. Explain. This is what we study. In a federal polity, we need better coordination between the center and the states in a federal polity. And this coordination has to be ensured by Chief Secretary. That is the reason why we say that Chief Secretary at the state level has more powers, has more functions, has more responsibilities than Cabinet Secretary at the central level. Why? Because any kind of differences between the center and states have to be resolved by Chief Secretary, because the differences can be political differences, and these political differences can unnecessarily result in confrontational federalism also. Chief Secretary must use his administrative abilities to resolve those differences. Why this question was asked? Why? Because last year in Bengal, what happened? In Bengal, the Chief Secretary did not attend the meeting called in by the Prime Minister to review the measures taken by the government for this floods that Bengal has witnessed. So that is the reason why these kind of questions are asked. Chief Secretary must remember the fact that he is neither part of the state government setup nor central government. He must be committed himself to the ideals of the constitution. Unfortunately, in recent times, what we have seen is a politicization of the office of the Chief Secretary, which led to unnecessary conflicts also. And this is where the coordinating role of the Chief Secretary becomes much more important. Why? Because we have these schemes in the central government, in the cabinet secretariat, wherein they would be continuously reviewing the performance of the flagship schemes of the government. At this point of time, the cabinet secretary would be meeting all the chief secretaries on a regular basis to oversee the performance. What is the scheme? Pragati, proactive governance and timely implementation. Our Prime Minister always fascinated by all these acronyms. First, Pragati means progress, development. Proactive governance and timely implementation. You don't know why they come out with these kind of acronyms, but you have to remember. So Chief Secretary would be attending the meetings. Similarly, Chief Secretary would also be attending the meetings called in by the Prime Minister as part of annual conference of Chief Secretaries. And then Chief Secretary is also the chief of the State Disaster Management Authority. So in that sense, he will be coordinating with the PMO and National Disaster Management Authority. And the Chief Secretary also would be overseeing the implementation of the flagship schemes of the central government. That is where again Chief Secretary has to ensure better coordination between the center and the state governments. Right? Similarly, if there is any law and order problem, again the central government would ask Chief Secretary to send the report, and Chief Secretary again has to provide the report to the central government. That is the reason why we say that he is the most important link between the center and states. Tomorrow, if there is any problem, central government will not ask the Chief Minister, it will ask the Chief Secretary. Why? Because he is the one who is the administrative head of the state. So you have to talk about all these functions of Chief Secretary. And you also have to give the examples of recent conflicts wherein the Chief Secretaries had started acting in a politically partisan role and come out with the solution. The solution is that the person who is appointed Chief Secretary should be the senior most IAS officer in the state, so that the office will not get unnecessarily politicized. Next, the Indian federal structure is largely symmetric, albeit with some asymmetric features. Examine the status of the states and union territories through the principle of weighted and differentiated equality in India. The question looks very high sounding words, but there is not much there in the answer as such, if you understand the question. The Indian federal structure is largely symmetric, albeit with some asymmetric features. As we have discussed, we have symmetric federalism as well as asymmetric federalism. That means in some aspects all the states are equal, in other aspects they are not equal. So what are the similar and what are the unequal features of our federalism? Through the principle of weighted and differentiated equality. Here, what are similar features here? And where do you find we say that we have symmetric federalism? All the states have equal powers in terms of legislative and executive powers. Articles this 70, not 70, Article 163, I think 162 and 163, they talk about the executive powers of the states. And Article 71 and 72, they talk about the articles 163 and 162 talk about legislative powers, and the rest of the articles talk about the executive powers, legislative and executive powers. What we say is that the executive powers of the state are derived from their legislative powers. That means on those items where they can make legislation, every state has absolute power to implement those legislations. Right? None of the states are discriminated by our constitution. On those items in the state list, every state has absolute power to make legislation, and they also have the absolute power to implement those legislations. Symmetrical federalism. Similarly, when it comes to the use of the emergency powers, center has to treat all the states uniformly. For example, if this financial emergency is imposed, national emergency is imposed, all the states will be under the same kind of a control of the central government, and there is no differentiation here. Similarly, there's for all these states, the transfer of funds from the center to the states will be the same, except for special category status states. For normal states, it will be the same. Transfer of funds from the central to the states. And in all the states, governors have the same equal amount of powers. Not one state having more powers, governor of one state having more powers and the other state having less powers. Right? And the states also have equal powers over the control of bureaucracy in their states, IAS officers and All India Service officers. That is what we say symmetrical federalism. At the same time, we also have asymmetrical federalism. How? Take the case of Rajya Sabha. Not all the states are represented equally. Not all the states are represented equally. Right? Rajya Sabha. Similarly, take the case of Lok Sabha. Not all the states have equal representation. Uttar Pradesh, 80 seats. And then small states like Nagaland and Mizoram, only 1 seat or 2 seats. Right? Not all the states are represented equally. Then take the case of Finance Commission recommendations. Weighted but differentiated inequality. Finance Commission recommendations. If you look at 15 Finance Commission, almost 19.5% of the funds are going only to Uttar Pradesh. 14% of the tax revenues are going to Bihar. That means UP and Bihar combined together have around almost 34% of the tax revenue shares. Weighted but differentiated inequality. Similarly, the special category status states, SES, as we have discussed in our class, the special category status states have so many benefits also, which you have to write here. And then in terms of what are the other differences that you can find here? What are the other differences that you can find here? Pardon? Powers of governors, governors have equal powers in all the states. In union territories, governors have real powers. That is what you have to write here. UTs. Union territories, governors have more powers than governors of normal states. Lieutenant Governor of Delhi has more powers. UTs. Right? And then where do you find other differences? In terms of allocation of funds by the central government to the states, especially disaster relief and everything else, center can always differentiate between the states depending on the nature of the disaster. They are all what we call discretionary grants given by the central government. Right? This is where you find asymmetrical federalism. Why? Because when it comes to transfer of funds from the center to the states, center would mostly take into consideration what is called equity than equality. Equity than equality. Right? And that is the reason why we have these differences. And that is the reason why we also have seen this confrontational federalism also. Right now, we are talking about competitive federalism, competition between the states, and we are also talking about confrontational federalism. because of the discretionary powers that are there in the hands of the central government in terms of making allocation to the states. States ruled by the opposition parties have said that they have been discriminated against by the central government. Right? So ultimately, how do you conclude your answer? You have to conclude your answer with collaborative federalism, wherein the states must come together. And of course, what is required is balanced regional development also. Balanced regional development also. Otherwise, it can lead to unnecessary socio-economic and other problems. Why? Because those states which are not developed, what we will see is the migration of people from those states to other states. And those states where they are migrating, there will be sons of the soil arguments. The jobs should be given to those their native people only. That can result in unnecessary socio-economic crisis also. So the focus should be on balanced regional development. That is what you have to write. Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is a progressive policy. Analyze. Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is what you call a progressive policy. So what is this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and what is there in this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? Why did the government of India come out with this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? When the country has faced what we call a disaster which takes place once in 100 years. A disaster which takes place in once in 100 years. Right? That is when the government of India felt that they can use this problem as an opportunity to introduce reforms. That is what the government has said. They can use this problem as an opportunity to introduce reforms. What is the essence of this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? As the name itself indicates, to make India self-reliant. To make India self-reliant. Why? Why? Because Corona crisis has proved the weaknesses in our economic policy. Dependence on foreign countries for raw materials and inputs, especially China. Whether it is drugs, whether it is chips, whether it is any other raw material, this is where we found it very, very difficult also. Not only India, rest of the world also. And what we have to say here is that Atmanirbhar Bharat does not mean protectionism. That is what the government says. It does not mean protectionism. We are not going back to economic policies before 1990s. What were the economic policies before 1990s? It was autarky, AUTARKY, closed economic system, wherein high tariffs were imposed on imports with the objective of self-reliance and self-sufficiency. This is not the objective of Atmanirbhar Bharat. What is the objective of Atmanirbhar Bharat? The objective of Atmanirbhar Bharat is to make in India, assemble in India, and also to make Indian industry globally competitive. To make Indian economy globally competitive. To make Indian economy globally competitive. So, the government, as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, has introduced various structural reforms. It has focused on technologies, and it has also focused on human resource development. It has also focused on human resources. Right? Then it has also focused on this self-reliant industries. Self-reliant industries. Then it also focused on providing a short-term relief to people who were affected by Corona crisis. It has also focused on welfare. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, they were all part of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So what are the reforms that the government has implemented as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat? What were the reforms? As we have discussed in our classes also, PLI scheme was introduced. production linked incentives. First it was started for automobile sector, and then it was extended to all the sectors. Initially it was for industrial sector. Very recently the government has extended the scheme to the service sector also, tourism and other services. Then what were the other reforms? Second one is labor reforms, labor codes. The government also has introduced labor reforms. Government had come out with labor codes, the much needed labor reforms. Third, the focus is on digital governance. Digital governance as part of this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The best example is this vaccination and everything, which is through this Arogya Setu app, digital governance. Then fourth, as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, what did the government do? The government also had increased customs and excise duties to protect domestic industry from flood of imports by foreign countries, to protect domestic industry, right? Then the government has also relaxed norms from Make in India. As part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we have moved towards Assemble in India. From Make in India, we have discussed these things also. Let you get the raw material from all the countries, assemble in India, and make benefits out of it, right? Then what else did the government do as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? Reforms in agriculture, agriculture reforms, especially the focus being on food processing industries, agrarian reforms. And of course, the three reform bills part of this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The three reform bills were part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, right? They were part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Then what else did the government do? The government also has given lot of incentives to the private sector in the form of loans being provided at very reduced rates of interest. During this period, the government wanted to encourage private sector to invest more. So the government has reduced the repo rates and the reverse repo rates. They were using monetary policy to achieve the objectives of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Then the most important one, the 20 lakh crore package announced by the government of India. 20 lakh crores package announced by the government of India as part of this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, out of which 1.8 lakh crores are the direct subsidies given to the poorest sections of society. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. Then another one is NREGA, wherein the government had spent around 1,30,000 crores. Another one is on PMJAY, huge amount of increase in the health expenditure also. All of them are part of Atmanirbhar Bharat packages. You have to write all of them. This is nothing but current affairs only, right? And after writing all these things, then you have to talk about what can be the future also, analysis. These Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan initiatives, they focus on structural reforms like labor code reforms. They also reduce the amount of paperwork needed to set up industries, digitalization of governance, improving the quality of service delivery mechanisms. They are necessary but not sufficient. That is what you have to say. The focus should be on improving infrastructure, because public investment in infrastructure is what that can galvanize private sector investment also, public sector. And the focus should be on employment creation, because Corona has witnessed huge amount of job losses. The focus should be on Corona. The focus should be on job-led growth, because Corona period has witnessed job loss growth, right? And what else do we want to say here? what else do we want to say about this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan? We say that schemes like PLI schemes can only provide short-term solutions. In the long term, the government should focus on demographic dividends and focus on physical infrastructure to provide impetus to the industrial sector. That is what you will have to write. Right? Next, indicative planning is a middle path of planning and market mechanism to ensure coordination between public and private activities. The good part of the question paper is that the answer is always there in the question itself. What you have to remember is that the good thing about our public administration, 99% of the questions, the answer is there in the question itself. Remaining 1% of the questions, the question itself is the answer. So you don't have to study anything. Go to the examination hall with a completely empty mind. Then you will write beautiful answers. The more you study in public administration, the less would be the performance. There is inverse relationship between, no, it is a fact. People don't accept the facts. It is very difficult. That's what we say. Truth is always stranger than fiction. People think that hard work is required. They don't know that hardly you do have to work. Right? Look at the question. The answer is there in the question itself. The Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is a progressive policy. What is so progressive about it? You have to write all these stupid things only. Right? Coming back here. Indicative planning is a middle path of planning and market mechanism to ensure coordination between public and private activities. As usual, you start with the why part of the question. Why indicative planning had come into existence? This indicative planning is a feature of capitalist economies. It had its origins in France. France was the first country to adopt indicative planning because France has laissez-faire economy. And in capitalist economies, market will play a very important role in realizing the economic objectives of the country. Rapid economic growth, controlling inflation, providing employment to people, increasing per capita income, improving your exports. They are all the objectives of economic policy. How to realize all these objectives? You can realize all with the help of market mechanism. But what is the problem with the market mechanism? In capitalist economies, markets, they are not perfect and they can never be perfect also. Markets are not perfect, they can never be perfect also. This is where we need interference by the state. But can the state directly interfere in the affairs of a market? In capitalism? Obviously not. State cannot directly interfere in the activities of the market. It becomes socialism. That is in a middle path in the form of indicative planning. And what is this middle path? The state, with the help of planning, would try to make sure that there will not be any market imperfections in the future. Would try to make sure that with the help of the can realize the objectives of inclusive and equitable growth. State would not interfere. As part of indicative planning, state would only indicate the financial outlays to be spent by the market forces. State would act as a catalyst for development through indicative planning. As we have discussed in the previous question, if the state through planning invests in infrastructure, public infrastructure, it would automatically motivate the market forces to increase their investments. And more importantly, the state should invest in those areas which are considered backward regions. That is what we say inclusive and equitable growth. And this is where indicative planning can be really helpful for you. Why? Because markets would invest only in those areas where infrastructure is already developed. Give the example of India. Only 4 states account for almost 90% of FDI the country is attracting. Out of 28 states and so many union territories, only 4 states are accounting for 90% of our FDI proposals. And this is where we need indicative planning. We need Niti Aayog to come out with this sustainable development goals as part of indicative planning, so that every state government can utilize their resources in such a manner to realize most of these goals. As we have said, economic growth is necessary but not sufficient. What is required is inclusive growth. And this is where indicative planning can be helpful. Through these state planning boards, through Niti Aayog, what the state governments can do, they can divert their resources for both physical and social infrastructure, so that tomorrow when the industry comes to your locality, your people are in a position to get better jobs also. This is what we studied as part of new localism also. Everything is part of indicative planning. Decentralized participative planning is what we call indicative planning. All these things you have to write as part of your answer. Why? Because the state-led development was a failure, so is market-dominated development. So what is required is a combination of state and market through public-private partnerships and also through indicative planning. That is what the answer is. Next, the new economic reforms during the past 3 decades have not only reduced the scope of industrial licensing and areas reserved exclusive for the public sector, but also infringed on the autonomy of the existing public sector undertakings. Examine. As we have discussed, these 1991 economic reforms, the government had radically transformed its industrial policy. After 1991 reforms, only 3 industries are reserved exclusively for public sector enterprise. One is railways, second one is atomic energy, third one is the minerals used in the atomic energy. Even these are also not exclusively reserved. The government is opting for a public-private partnership in railways for majority of the projects. Same is the case with the atomic energy also. So the number of industries that are exclusively reserved had come down drastically. And the second part of the question says that it also infringed the autonomy of existing public sector undertakings. Right? It has infringed the autonomy of the existing public sector undertakings. Examine. What do you mean by that? What is the meaning of the statement? The new economic reforms have infringed the autonomy of existing public sector undertakings. Pardon? And what is the meaning of the statement? They have reduced the autonomy of existing public sector undertakings. Did the new economic reforms reduce the autonomy of public sector enterprises? Did they reduce the autonomy of public sector enterprises, or they have increased the autonomy? They have increased the autonomy of public sector enterprises. Then why the statement was made? Why the statement was made? They have infringed upon the autonomy of public sector enterprise. This statement was made because public sector enterprises now are expected only to look at one aspect, that is profit maximization. Now the public sector enterprise performance is evaluated only in terms of their ability to earn profits and nothing else. Earlier they were performing welfare functions also. They were performing less welfare functions also. And when they were performing welfare functions, they were invariably incurring losses also. Now, if any public sector enterprise is incurring losses, automatically there will be huge amount of pressure on the government to close down the public sector enterprise. In that sense, these new economic reforms have reduced the autonomy of public sector enterprises. Please remember, these public sector enterprises are the industries owned by the government with the objective of maximizing their profits, right? But when we had to come out with this public sector enterprise, more than the profit motive, what really dominated the concern of this public sector enterprise was the welfare. They were supposed to work for the people. They were supposed to create infrastructure. They were supposed to provide employment to the people, and they were supposed to provide basic services and goods to the citizens. These were all the objectives. Now, after 1991 economic reforms in the last 3 decades, what we have seen is that public sector enterprises have been put under severe pressure by the government to only maximize their profits and nothing else. Earlier, they used to be model employers, public sector enterprises. As part of model employers, they would construct for their employees. They would provide all kinds of facilities also. Everyone want to be an employee of public sector enterprise because of the kind of comforts and luxuries given by them. Now, public sector enterprises are not at all looking at any of those things. They are into mostly cost-cutting measures. They are into economy only, because this economy is needed for them to be efficient. This is where it is said that these public sector enterprises, this LPG has infringed autonomy of the public sector enterprise. They are not at all concerned about the distributive aspects of growth. Distributive aspects of growth means whether economic growth is benefiting the poorest sections of society or not. They are only concerned about the quantitative aspects of growth. How much they are contributing to the GDP of the country, how much they are contributing to the tax revenues of the country, how much dividend they are giving to the government. They are only concerned about these things. Take the case of public sector banks. When they had come into existence, their objective was to provide financial assistance to people in rural areas. Now, because of the huge amount of pressure put by the government on their performance, most of them are closing down their rural branches also to cut down their administration. So this is where we say the problem with public sector enterprise. Their autonomy has been taken away due to economic reforms. Right? Similarly, as we have discussed, earlier they were employing 2.3 million people. Now, the regular employees of public sector enterprise are less than 1 million. Job loss growth from 2.3 million people to it is less than 1 million. And what most of the public sector enterprises are opting for nowadays, they are opting for contract employment, wherein you will give them fixed salary. They don't have any other benefits also, like the regular employees. This is where it was said that these economic reforms have taken away the autonomy of public sector enterprises. And after writing all these things, either is it good or bad? That is what we have to look at. Definitely, it is good, because it is the resources of the country, taxpayers' money, that is being used to finance these public sector enterprises. At the end of the day, it is the taxpayers' money. So obviously, it cannot be wasted in the name of welfare, because the government is always inefficient when it comes to performing these welfare functions. Let public sector enterprises be professional in terms of their functioning. Let them focus only on profit maximization and efficient utilization of resources. The government can use the surplus, the dividends and the profits from public sector enterprises for welfare purposes. Give the example here, Food Corporation of India. The Food Corporation of India is buying food grains from the farmers at MSP decided by the government, and they are selling the same food grains to the PDS shops in the states, again for a price determined by the government. They are buying at 40 rupees, they are selling it at 3 rupees. Automatically they are incurring 37 rupees losses. So who is eating this money? Where this money is going? Instead of that, as suggested by various committees, Shantakumar committee, the question that was asked this year in your economy also, PDS reforms, let this FCA be closed down. Let there be decentralized procurement of food grains. Let there be food coupons, so that you will be in a position to reduce the losses also. Again, go back to Herbert Simon here. This is what Simon says, rational decision making, which is very important for public administration. And this rationality should be defined in terms of cost benefit analysis. Why? Because unless the government, public sector enterprise become efficient, they cannot serve the objectives of equity and inclusiveness. So that is the reason why these reforms are needed. That is what you have to write for this question. Next, Niti Aayog has become a super cabinet in formulating the development agenda of our country. Examine the statement by giving suitable examples. So the question says that it has become a super cabinet. Do you agree with the statement? Right? So if the statement is made, there must be some kind of truth in it. Or can we give any kind of arguments to support this statement? Niti Aayog, what Niti Aayog is doing is nowadays, they are coming out with the reports of performance of all the ministries and departments. They are coming out with reports. Mir Shah committee, it had come out with a report on water crisis in India. 75 years of independence. They have come out with a report on agriculture ministry, industry ministry, rural development, urban development, and also law and order, public order. They had come up with all these reports. So what is happening is that these reports are influencing the decision making within the government, either positively or negatively. That is a different matter. It is there influencing the decision making within the government. As we say, information is knowledge and knowledge is power. Niti Aayog with its dedicated team of research scholars, they go in depth into policy evaluation, and they are not at all afraid of coming out with the weaknesses or limitations in the functioning of the ministries and departments. They are not at all afraid of coming out with the criticism of the policies of the various ministries and departments. That is what, as a research organization, it is supposed to do. And these reports definitely are influencing the policies of the government. For example, recently Ministry of this water resources, they have changed the name of the ministry also. What is it? Jal Shakti. Water resources, they call it, they drastically changed the name by giving Hindi translation to English name, right? And there they said that they have taken note of water shortage in India. Similarly, Agriculture Ministry also recently had taken note of Niti Aayog report. Niti Aayog has said that by 2027, India might be facing food crisis also. Niti Aayog report. As I keep on saying, you have to read the reports of Niti Aayog for your examination. Similarly, Niti Aayog had submitted a report on food processing industry, which is taken up by Agriculture and Food Processing Ministry. It has come out with a report on this urbanization, which is taken up by Urban Development Ministry. Right? So, because of the continuous presentation of reports by Niti Aayog and also 75 years of independence, it has come out with a comprehensive report also. It is believed by some people that Niti Aayog had become a super cabinet. But do we agree with the statement? Obviously not. Because why? It does not have any financial powers. Second, we don't have any 5-year plans. Third, it cannot allocate any monies to the ministry and departments as part of planned expenditure. When there is no planning, there is no scope for any planned expenditure. It does not have any mechanism to oversee the implementation of plans also. When there are no plans, there is no mechanism to oversee the implementation. And recommendations of Niti Aayog are only advisory in nature. And the final decisions will be taken by Niti Aayog Executive Council, which consists of Minister, Cabinet Minister, and all state chief ministers. For all these reasons, we say that Niti Aayog is not a super cabinet. Right? Next. Despite constitutional status, DPC remained a non-entity in preparation and implementation of plans. Discussed. Did we discuss these things in our class? I said that every year this question will be asked. Last year also the same question was there. Before last year also the same question was there. When Kautilya conducting the UPS examination, this question was there. Every year the same question. So why? What are the reasons why DPCs have been a failure? Why? What are the reasons? We have given all the reasons in our class. Let us all of them. First one is dominance of centrally sponsored schemes. Because of the centrally sponsored schemes, what we have said, these panchayats have become nothing but line departments responsible for implementation. Centrally sponsored schemes. Second, what are the other reasons? These panchayat bodies suffer from 3 F's: functions, functionaries, and finances. Now, the fourth problem also we have added functionality. Right? Next, third reason, failure of the state governments to conduct elections on a regular basis to panchayat bodies. Fourth, failure of the state governments to constitute state finance commissions. state finance commissions, right? This is another reason. Next, DPCs. 80% of the members of DPCs are elected members from the panchayat and urban bodies. They do not have any technical expertise to formulate plans. And next reason is colonial attitudes of district collectors, bureaucracy. District collectors are expected to act as friend, philosopher and guide to these bodies, but they never. Next reason we have given is the preference of the state governments to rule with the help of bureaucracy than democratic leadership at the district level. Next reason we have given is emergence of a state at the state level powerful secretariat which oversees the implementation of all the schemes directly. Next reason is DBT, direct benefit transfers. Every state is only giving DBT, so where is the need for any planning also? We have spoken about all of them. Even if you write 4 or 5 reasons, you will get marks, right? In the class we give 10, so that when you read you remember 5. Go to the examination, recall, write 1, right? But out of 10 you will take only 0, not 1, right? You have to write all of them. Next, the Indian judicial system has failed to deliver justice expeditiously. Examine the challenge faced by judiciary and suggest measures to overcome them. Did we discuss them? Yes. 45 million cases, 47 million cases are pending. 4.7 crore cases. This is what the Ministry of Law has replied, in Law Minister has replied on the floor of the House. 47 million cases are pending at all levels in our judiciary. Some of these cases are pending for the last of 30-40 years also. Some cases are pending for 50 years also. They have celebrated Golden Jubilee. Right? Justice delayed is justice denied. What are the reasons? We have discussed all the reasons. What are the reasons why the cases are pending? Why? What are the weaknesses in the functioning of our judiciary? Right from the lowest to the topmost level. What are the reasons? At the lowest level, as we the tendency of the lawyers to seek postponement of cases all the time, adjournment of cases, the tendency of lawyers. Recently, Supreme Court also, you must have seen the newspapers, has criticized this tendency, has asked the lawyers that they should be present on the day when they are coming up in the Supreme Court. If they are not present, their juniors must be present, otherwise they will have decisions. The first and foremost is this deliberate delay by the lawyers involved in the cases. Staff strength. We don't have any adequate staff strength. Third one is poor investigative mechanisms. Because in 70% of the cases, the main litigant is the state itself. In 70% of the cases, the main litigant is the state. So poor investigation mechanisms. Then what are the other reasons why? PALs, huge number of PALs that are filed in the High Courts and Supreme Courts, which are coming in the way of regular functioning of judiciary. And then of course, judge-people ratio in India is one of the lowest in the world also. Judge-people ratio, one of the lowest. And then Supreme Court cases, it is also in a court of appeal. So most of the time Supreme Court will be taking up the cases that were already adjourned, that were already decided in the lower courts. Apart from that, it also takes up constitutional also. Next reason why we have so much pendency of cases is because of complicated laws, rules and regulations. Next reason is failure of these tribunals. Tribunals also have failed. Most of the tribunals have failed. Right? Then what are the other reasons why we have so much of a pendency of cases? There is no time limit for our judiciary to come out with judgments. There is no time limit for our judiciary to come out with judgments. And then next reason is our Supreme Court takes too many holidays. I think the other day also there was an article, I think, which newspaper, don't ask me. It was the Times of India, I think. There was an editorial. about our Supreme Court taking a summer break, winter break, Dashara break, Diwali break, and they are only breaking, right? That is where. So this is what another thing, another reason, right? And we don't have any e-courts also, because you want the witnesses to be present physically. Most of the time it is not possible for the witnesses. That results in again postponement, adjournment of cases also, right? And what are the measures? You can talk about all the things, reverse them, you will get all the solutions, right? In recent times we have also seen politicization of judiciary unwilling to take up constitutional cases. For example, in the last 7 or 8 years, they did not take up most of the constitutional cases, whether Aadhaar is a money bill or not, the repeal of Article 370 and Article 35A, or the right to privacy. So there are so many constitutional cases, or this UAPA, or this we have discussed in our class also, there is money laundering cases also, PLMI. These are all the things which the Supreme Court is not willing to take up also, right? Next, analyze the specific areas of controversies with regard to Union State financial relations, particularly in the context of one nation, one tax policy. I think this question was directly asked from our notes, right? That is the problem. We don't have any, right? Sometimes even gods also feel bad, right? We work selflessly for the humanity, that's a different thing. But this kind of blatant copying is what really hurts you, right? At least they can give some kind of acknowledgement in brackets, right? So what are the major problems in center-state financial relations? We started with Finance Commission. Second, vertical devolution of tax revenues. Third, horizontal devolution of tax revenues. Fourth, grants in aid given to the states. Fifth, performing states complaining that they are being penalized for their performance. Then GST, problems related to GST, one tax, one country regime. Then what are the other issues? Loan raising capabilities of center versus states. Then dividends from central public sector enterprises that are located in the states. Then FRBM legislation, as we have discussed. There is no limit for central government. They can take as much of loan as they want, but the states are asked to take loans within the, and the states, when they have asked the central government to increase their fiscal deficit to GDP ratio from 3% to 5%, central government had put so many conditions for the state governments. Then we also spoke about there's a most important issue, that is there's a cess and surcharge the central government imposes. The central government has collected around 28 lakh crores in the last 8 years, which otherwise they should have shared with the state governments. And another important issue is the auctioning of natural resources. The government has got around 1.7 lakh crores by auctioning 5G. States are getting 0G, right? So that is what. So these are all the issues that we have discussed, and we have provided all the solutions also, including GST. We have spoken separately about GST. Some people felt bad also. Why are we discussing economy in public administration, right? Why are we unnecessarily crossing our boundaries and discussing economy? That is what they are asking UPSC, right? I think this is we have done extensively in our class, all these things. Examine the role of the central government in adjudication of disputes relating to water of interstate rivers. I remember this also. I said that we will be discussing interstate river water disputes. I said that we will discuss towards the end. Even though I said that it was not part of public administration, but UPSC heard our class. They said that everything is part of public administration. You have to discuss everything in the class. Otherwise, interstate river water disputes, it is not strictly part of Indian administration. It is part of mostly polity. Last year the question was asked in General Studies paper 1 also. The same question was asked in GS paper 1. So what is the role of the central government in adjudicating disputes relating to interstate river water disputes. What are the states where you find this kind of river water disputes? Mostly South Indian states. Do we find these kind of disputes in North India? Why not? People of North India are good. Why? Yeah, for a change. We are praising them after a long. No, the rivers of North India are good, not people. Why we don't have any problem with sharing of river waters in North India? Why we have in South India? This requires a little bit of geography, right? So if you take this is the map of India. Kashmir we don't know, it's a disputed territory, leave it. Otherwise, any map you put on Twitter, again there is problem with Kashmir. Shishithar also had faced the same problem, so we will not go into it. So we believe in Akhand Bharat, everything is part of India only. Right? So what is the thing with the North Indian rivers is that they flow horizontally. If you are flowing horizontally, it becomes difficult to construct dams. In the case of river Ganges, it flows horizontally through all the states. So there is no problem. The problem comes up, the rivers flow vertically. If you are flowing vertically, you can construct a dam and stop the flow of the river water. You cannot construct a dam when you are, when the river is flowing horizontally. That is the reason why there is no problem with North Indian rivers. On the other hand, the problem is with South Indian rivers. You have, Godavari and Krishna. Both of them had their origins in Maharashtra. And then you have the river Kaveri. These are all the major disputes. Why? Because when Maharashtra constructed a dam over the river Krishna, then the entire Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and other states would become dry. Why? Because water cannot be given to these states. Similarly, Kaveri. You can see almost every year Tamil Nadu and Karnataka fighting like street dogs. Street dogs are more civilized. Over sharing of river waters. In Bangalore, Tamil films, they will be banned. Tamil actors will be banned. And in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu, Udupi hotels will be set on fire. They do all these cultural activities almost on a daily basis. And in Tamil Nadu, you can see the chief minister always on a fast track, fast only, all the time. He or she will go to Marina Beach, Chennai, and sit on fast unto death. They say that we want water, and there is so much of water in front of you. Marina Beach, Tamil Nadu, right? So that is what it is. Why? Because the rivers flow from west to east, from north to south. That is where the problem is. So when Maharashtra is constructing dams, when Karnataka constructs dams, entire Tamil Nadu would go dry because the water will not be released. Then how this river disputes are resolved? That is what the question that they have asked. So what does the central government do? We have these tribunals. In 1970s itself, central government had set up tribunals. Kaveri River Water Tribunal was set up in 1970s. And at the same time, we also have these tribunals for different rivers. Godavari, Bachavat Tribunal for Krishna River waters, Godavari, Kaveri. And these tribunals are expected to give their judgments. These tribunals are set up under Article 262 of our Constitution. They are constitutional bodies and their award is final. The role of the central government is to implement the award given by the tribunals. And why this question was asked? Why? Because recently the government of India had come out with a tribunals amendment bill on the floor of the House, wherein the government has removed tribunals for all the rivers. You have one tribunal for river Kaveri, one tribunal for Godavari, one tribunal for Krishna, and the tribunal for other rivers. And what the government has done is they have merged all the tribunals. You have only one single river water tribunal for all the rivers. And the government will have a separate committee to look into each and every sharing of river waters of each and every river also. And what is the problem here? When the tribunal comes out with the final award, the problem here is that the state governments will not implement the award. Karnataka says that if I give water to Tamil Nadu farmers, my farmers will die. Tamil Nadu says that if you don't give our water, then our farmers will die. So someone will have to die. Let both of them die. Right? Then what do they do? Karnataka says that there will be law and order problem. Farmers are sitting near the gates of these dams. If you open the gates, all the farmers will drown and they will die. I cannot open the gates because it is a law and order problem. Tamil Nadu says that it is also a law and order problem for us. Finally, then they will file a special leave petition in the Supreme Court, SPL. Special leave petition will be filed in the Supreme Court. Karnataka says that I cannot give river water to Tamil Nadu because of the law and order problem. Tamil Nadu says that whatever the award given by the tribunal is not sufficient, we want more water. We want more water, otherwise there will be PS3, PS1 and PS2 and PS3 also. Right, that is what Tamil Nadu says. There will be PS3 also. That means there will be more sons from Kaveri river who will be coming and fighting Karnataka's. That is what they would say. So finally Supreme Court will interfere and the Supreme Court will come out with a judgment. It is the responsibility of the central government to ensure the implementation of Supreme Court judgment. That is what it is. And what are the other solutions? I think I have given it in my notes also. We will be discussing them later in the class also. This is only for 10 marks. Right? Now, let us come to section B. Examine the lateral entry recruitment in government in the context of part 14 of Indian Constitution. What is part 14 of Indian Constitution? It deals with recruiting agencies, services, civil services. Articles 309 to 315. Articles 309 to 315. Right? Examine the lateral entry recruitment in the context of part 14 of the Indian Constitution. So why do we need lateral entry in civil services? Why? Because as we have discussed, fresh blood is what that is required in the government all the time. Fresh blood. These civil servants who are there in for the last 30 years, for good or bad, they are used to bureaucratic norms. They are not used to taking creative or innovative decisions. It results in status quo within the administration. Second, in the age of globalization, we need specialists in the organization. Agriculture ministry should be headed by a person who has done research in agriculture for 30 years. On the other hand, who will be your agriculture secretary? Who has taken history optional 30 years back, got into services, and then whose basic objective is to make agriculture part of your history. Right? This is where we need lateral entry into the government. Because we need more specialists in government. We need more specialists. In the age of globalization, governance mostly involves specialization. And when these people come from the private sector, they know the problems, actual problems faced by the private sector, they can come out with better policies. For example, when telecom ministry is coming out with the telecom policy, the telecom secretary never worked in the private sector. He never had any kind of practical experience with how this mobile functions, mobile sector functions. And he is the one who is responsible for formulating the policies. Automatically, the policies will not reflect ground level realities. When the people from the private sector come, they take with themselves a lot of experience of working in the private sector. Now the question is not about all these things. What is this lateral entry recruitment in the context of part 14 of our constitution? Why this is important? Why? Because if you look at articles 310 and 311, they give security of tenure to civil servants. They provide security of tenure to civil servants. That means they cannot be removed by any authority which is lower than the authority that has appointed them. And you will get your appointment letter from the President of India. So you cannot be removed by anyone below President of India. Is there anyone above President of India? And is there any President of India? Do we have a President? Yes, I think we have a President. Now, what is the name? Right, very good. Very good. Born vita quiz contest questions, you are answering very well. right? So now why this lateral entry becomes, because the UPSC is conducting, taking this officers into civil services in various ministries and departments of the level of rank of joint secretary. They have done some recruitments recently. 10 officers were recruited. They were recruiting more officers also nowadays. The question that comes up here is that will they have the security of tenure like all India service officers? If you are an IAS officer, you are working in the government of India as a joint secretary, you will be there till your retirement age of 60 years. Those officers who have been recruited through lateral entry, will they have this kind of security of tenure? The first question that we have to ask. Normally, right now, through lateral entry, when they are recruited, they will be there only for the term of the government. That means till this government lasts. After that, they will not have any security of tenure. This is one thing. Second, will they be subjected to the other career related conditions of these IAS officers? Will they have any promotion in those during those times? How will their performance evaluation will be done? Yes, someone is talking, right? How will the performance evaluation be done of these officers? Because they are all specialists. And do they have any different performance evaluation measures compared to these regular IAS officers? And what about their salary and other service conditions? All this is a problematic one as part of between Articles 309 and 315. This lateral entry. Now what the government at this point of time is saying is that they are recruited by UPSC only, and they are recruited by UPSC on the basis of criteria decided by the government. So this lateral entry will not result in any kind of politicization of civil services. Now what is the opposition to this lateral entry? Opposition parties are saying that in the name of lateral entry, all the RSS ideologues would be joining the government. It results in politicization of civil services. Now what is the response of the government? The government is saying that there is no question of any governmental interference in the recruitment. It will be done completely by UPSC only. UPSC will fix the criteria and they will recruit. And another problem with lateral entry is that those who are working in the private sector, they can have conflict of interest. You are working in the private sector and you are working in the ministry related to the same industry. What is the guarantee that tomorrow you will not come out with a policy that would benefit your previous employer? And since as part of lateral entry they will be there only for 4 or 5 years, they will go back and they will not have the same kind of commitment to the government as a career bureaucrats also. So these were all the problems that are related to lateral entry. Since we have only begun with this experiment, we will have to see whether it will be successful or not. Right? Examine the role of SEBI in protecting the interests of the investors in securities. I remember we have discussed this also in our class as part of regulatory authorities. SEBI is basically what we call a regulatory authority that had been set up by a statute of parliament. SEBI, it is a statutory body. It has semi-legislative, it has semi-executive and semi-judicial powers also. It has the powers to frame the rules and regulations for the functioning of stock markets. SEBI comes out with the guidelines. It comes out with the functioning of stock markets. It also has the powers to implement those guidelines. For example, SEBI has said that insider trading is a crime, and SEBI also has said that the listed companies must come out with their quarterly financial statements. And SEBI also has spoken about what are corporate malpractices also by the companies in the stock exchanges. It also has the powers, judicial powers, to come out with judgments. And what is the problem here? The powers of SEBI are limited. They can only impose fines on those industrial organizations which do not follow their guidelines, but they do not have any power to collect the fines also. If they don't pay the fine, they don't have any powers of what we call contempt of court. And in the previous years, what we can see is that SEBI has failed to prevent majority of the corporate scams. For example, 1992, stock market scam, Arshad Mehta. 2000, another stock market scam, Ketan Mehta, Ketan Parekh, right? And then this Sachin Computers. SEBI in all these instances has failed. And give the other instance wherein SEBI caught, SEBI versus Sahara. We have discussed in the class. Sahara. SEBI has asked Sahara Investment Financial Corporation to return all the 70,000 crores of rupees of deposits they have collected along with the rate of interest, that is 25,000 crores. Sahara did not do. They went to the high courts and got a stay on the order given by SEBI. SEBI could not do anything. Finally, SEBI had to approach Supreme Court. And this is where we said that these regulatory authorities should be given more powers. Another controversy we have spoken about is the appointment of members. Mostly retired bureaucrats are appointed as members to these organizations. That is where these institutions lose the credibility among the market players also. We have spoken about all of them. Right? Next, citizen charters in India have not succeeded in their objectives in making administrative system citizen-centric. Do you agree? Give results. I think we have given 100 results in the class. You can write at least one. I don't have too much of expectations from you people, even if you write one. Why citizen charters have been a failure in India? First, we have said that citizen charters are not real citizen charters, they are only bureaucratic charters. Second, they are only voluntary commitment, so bureaucracy never took them seriously. Third, they are nothing but the pious statements of noble intentions not having any practical value. Railways, we gave the example also. Right? Safe and comfortable travel. You are taking train from Delhi to Patna. Right? We have discussed all of them in a very elaborate manner in our class so that you can never forget even in your dreams also. Right? I don't think I need to discuss this question. Right? Very good. Following the onset of globalization, the traditional bureaucratic model appears to have lost its significance. Comment. Yes, that is what we have said. What we have said is that vertical hierarchies should be replaced with horizontal hierarchies. Vertical hierarchies should be replaced with horizontal hierarchies. Generalist civil servants should be replaced with specialists. Lateral entry should be the norm. Performance evaluation should be completely changed from rule orientation to outcome orientation. From rule orientation to outcome orientation. Digital governance should be the norm. Digital governance. Digital governance. And then more importantly, we said, as we discussed later also in our classes, Article 310 and 311 should be removed from the Constitution, which gives a security of tenure to our bureaucracy. Article 310 and 311 should be removed. Otherwise, what is happening? We have so much of dead wood in our bureaucracy. We need lean and mean bureaucracy. These traditional bureaucratic structures with emphasis on hierarchy, written communication, rules and regulations, anonymity, value neutrality, and written communication, it should be replaced with horizontal hierarchies with a specialist coming through lateral entry with objective performance evaluation and also with focus on outcomes. That is what we say. Right? The financial suitability of urban local bodies can become a reality only when they receive their due share of public finances. Again, I think we have discussed these things in our class. The basic problem with urban local bodies, as we have discussed, we require at least 100 lakh crores of rupees to improve urban infrastructure. To get this money, that is where the problem is. Again, as we have discussed in our class, any problem? I said, any kind of problems you can always ask me. Don't have any problem, you can still ask me. I will create problems for you. Right? So, if you discuss among yourself, you're only creating problems for yourself. Right? And we are doing to take these things seriously. Right? Remember the difference between NPL and IPL. Right? So make sure that you are working very hard. Very, very important. So don't take them anything except with all seriousness. So we need 100 lakh crores of rupees with flagship schemes of the government like smart cities and what is that other scheme? Amrit. They are getting only around 1 lakh crores. What about remaining change, small change, 99 lakh crores? Where do you get this money? And we have discussed. What we have said is that first and foremost, it should be made mandatory for the state governments to set up a finance commission 5 years. According to the Niti Aayog reports, only very few states have set up a third finance commission. By this time, most of the state governments should have been into the fifth or sixth finance commission. Second, there should be a separate window in the state budget for local self-governments. Then we have spoken about other important reforms. This Central Finance Commission, it is giving 5% of funds directly to local bodies as part of a Finance Commission recommendations. Again, the state governments do not transfer these funds directly to local bodies on time because the money will come to the state government. State governments would use that money for other purposes. For example, when Mayawati was the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, whatever the funds she got from for the local bodies, she used that money to pay the salaries of the state government employees. What can the central government do? They will stop the funds next time. When they stop the funds, who suffer the most? Again, urban local bodies only. So we need a mechanism wherein the monies are given to these bodies on a timely basis. Apart from this, we spoke about other reforms. These urban local bodies should look at maximizing their revenue potential also. We spoke about capital expenditure. We spoke about revenue expenditure. We also spoke about urban local bodies raising monies by issuing bonds, municipal bonds. We also spoke about urban local bodies, adopting this outcome budgets and accrual-based accounting systems, so that they can attract a good amount of money for their municipal bonds also. We also spoke about urban local bodies becoming proactive in collecting the taxes, especially house tax. In the Delhi recent elections, all the three political parties, BJP, Congress and AAP, they promised to abolish house tax, right? Similarly, they are giving everything free of cost, education, health, then water, electricity. Then how can they have monies also? We have spoken about all the reforms also in our class, right? So it's again a very straightforward question. Then the recommendations of a National Finance Commission are more norms based than the need based. In the light of this statement, analyze the terms of reference of a 15th Finance Commission. Again, directly, someone is attending our classes from UPSC, right? That is where I think the problem is. Please tell me who is the black sheep. I want to know right now itself. Right? Who is that black sheep? Right? So coming back here, what do you mean by they are norms based than need based? The recommendations of Finance Commission are norms based than need based. What are the norms followed by the Finance Commission to give revenues to the state governments? Vertical and horizontal distribution of tax revenues. As we have said, two things. One, efficiency. Second one is equity. They are not need based. If it is need based, then what happens? 100% revenue should go only to Bihar. Right? Even if 100% revenues are not enough, next 5,000 years revenues also should only go to Bihar. Intra-generational equity, intergenerational equity, everything should be going to Bihar only, if it is need based. Right? So, they are not need based. They are only norm based. What are the norms? As I have said, two things. Finance Commission follows two important criteria. One is efficiency, second one is equity. But maximum importance is given to equity than efficiency. And that is where 15th Finance Commission, we have discussed also in the class, the terms of reference of 15th Finance Commission has led to so much of controversy with the South Indian states saying that they are being discriminated by the Finance Commission for their improvement in their performance. Population of Tamil Nadu and Bihar in 1960s was the same. Now, Bihar's population is 2.5 times more than Tamil Nadu's population, unofficial. Official 100 times, right? So, this is where it is problematic. And that is why 15th Finance Commission had come out with a revised criteria as part of its devolution of tax revenues. It has spoken about population, poverty, size of the state, then tax efforts, and then demographic performance, ecology and forests. In order to make sure that it will be addressing the questions raised by performing states, and at the same time it is also taking care of the equity concerns of the poor or underdeveloping states. And that is the reason why after 15th Finance Commission recommendations were implemented, the amount of tax revenues to Karnataka have actually increased, in spite of the fact that Karnataka was performing very well in economic and other indicators. The amount of tax revenues to Kerala also has remained stable. They did not go down as feared by Kerala. Why? Because Kerala has stabilized its population a long time back. And the amount of tax revenues to Tamil Nadu have gone down slightly down only. Similarly, the tax revenues to Telangana or Andhra Pradesh also have gone down slightly compared to the 14th Finance Commission, because it was trying to ensure balance between efficiency and equity also. I think we have discussed all of them. I have given all the statistics also. You have to remember all of them in the and write them in the examination. Next, the objective of Mission Karmayogi is to enhance the capacity building of Indian civil servants and improve governance. Very cute questions, very cute. You start liking them the moment you see the question. Cute and innocent questions, right? The objective of Mission Karmayogi is to enhance capacity building of Indian services and improve governance. Very good. All right. So this is a very straightforward question. There was one, I think, Yojana, wherein this Mission Karmayogi was there on the front page. Around 15-20 articles were also there. In our previous classes, I have taken that Yojana and I have also dictated everything from the Yojana only. And also, of course, this Mission Karmayogi, why the government had come out with this? Why? Because after 1990s, India had implemented two major reforms. One is LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. Second one is 73rd, 74th amendments. So bureaucracy obviously was not in a position to understand and empathize with these reforms, because LPG requires a completely different mindset on the part of bureaucracy. Earlier they were working under a highly centralized, top-down, monopolistic environment, wherein the state was the only factor that was responsible for development, only institution. After LPG, we have seen private sector playing a very important role. So bureaucracy must transform itself from a controlling authority to that of a regulatory authority. It must transform itself into a facilitator to ensure smooth governance. But unfortunately, bureaucracy did not possess those abilities. They neither had the aptitude nor the attitude for this kind of changes. So that is the reason why in 1996, the government of India had come out with a national training policy. And this national training policy was also not that much effective. That is when in 2012, the government of India had come out with another national training policy. Why? Because by 2012, more changes have taken place. The most important change that had taken place after 2012 was the government had opted for rights-based approach to governance. And the government also fully implemented digital governance. Along with that, another important change that had taken place was the increasing role played by NGOs and civil society organizations. All the flagship schemes of the government now are implemented with the help of NGOs and civil society organizations. So we are moving towards what is called new public governance. In 2010, this NPG had come into existence. We were moving towards, and it was found that bureaucracy did not adapt itself to the changes. That is why the National Training Policy 2012 spoke about capacity building of bureaucracy, focusing on changing their attitudes and aptitudes. Here, bring in Fredericks. He said that administrative development is necessary to realize the objectives of development administration. And this administrative development means enhancing the productive capacities of bureaucracy through training. That is what the National Training Policy 2012 spoke about. Again, it was not implemented. So after every 10 years, you wake up and come out with a new policy. So in 2020, as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, please remember, the government had come out with this mission Karma Yogi. Karma Yogi, this word is taken from Hindu philosophy. Karma Yogi means the person who performs his work in a selfless manner, who derives maximum satisfaction in the work he is performing. As my good friend Krishna talks about it. Innocent also, very innocent person. In Bhagavad Gita, he says that if you want to be a self-actualized person, the best way to become a self-actualized person is by following Karma Yoga. He talks about 4 different yogas: Jnana, Bhakti Marg, Jnana, then this Raj Yoga, and finally Karma Yoga. That means perform your task in a selfless manner, derive maximum satisfaction in the work that you are performing. Do not attach yourself to the outcome of the work you are performing. And this is the philosophy behind Mission Karma Yogi. Bureaucrats must work in a selfless manner for the society. They should not be looking for either rewards or awards, recognition or promotions. They should work for the society in a selfless manner. The objective of this Mission Karma Yogi is to change their attitudes, aptitudes, values, and functioning through training. Mission Karma Yogi has this what is called I Got platform, IGOT, and our Prime Minister had come out with an acronym for it also, I Got. And the objective here is to provide training to bureaucracy through online methods. And also, as the Mission Karma Yogi talks about it, from rule-based to role-based bureaucracy. From rule orientation to role orientation, outcome orientation. Right? So there are so many other things that we talk about it here. The objective is to focus on quality service delivery mechanisms. The objective is to change the attitudes and values of bureaucracy from colonial to democratic. The objective is to enhance their productive capacities. Why? Because now they are supposed to work in an environment where they are working in a multi-actor paradigm. They have to work with the civil society organizations, they have to work with the media, they have to work with the NGOs, they have to work with the private sector, they have to work with MNCs. And their objective right now is to facilitate coordination between all these multiple actors involved in the development process. And it requires complete radical orientation, changes in their training methods, in their overall outlook towards the organization also. And this is what Mission Karma Yogi speaks about it. And of course, don't ask me about its outcomes. Right? It is being implemented means it is being implemented. And what is the amount of money the government has allocated for Mission Karma Yogi? I don't want to disappoint you. Every civil servant will be given a royal sum of 700 rupees. 700 rupees. The government would be spending a royal sum of 780 rupees on every civil servant to provide training for 1 year as part of Mission Karma Yogi. So that's why I said I don't want to disappoint. That's why I like these kind of cute questions. You start liking them. Look at the children, 2-3 years. You start liking them for what they are. It's in the same manner you like UPSC questions. They are so innocent. They are so cute. This Mission Karma Yogi will enhance capacity building. It will also improve governance. Right? So you have to write all of them in the examination. Parliamentary control over administration is no substitute for judicial control. Comment. Again, this was asked in the previous years only. It was asked in the previous years. Parliamentary control over administration is no substitute for judicial control. How can the parliament control administration? What are the instruments in the hands of the parliament to control administration? You have question over, right? And then 0 over, different kinds of motions, calling attention motion, adjournment motion, and confidence and no confidence motion. These are all the different instruments in the hands of the Parliament to control administration. The question says that it is no substitute for judicial control. Why? Because judicial control over administration is more direct, more immediate, and the impact is also very, very huge also. How can the judiciary control administration? Through various writs, the 5 different kinds of writs. What are they? Certiorari, mandamus, prohibition, quo warranto, and habeas corpus. And here, what is the basic difference here? In case of judicial control over administration, judiciary would make administration legally accountable for its performance. Through all these 5 different kinds of writs, judiciary will make administration legally accountable for its performance. On top of it, judiciary also has this instrument called contempt of court. Judiciary can call the DGP, High Court can call the DGP and ask him to stand in the witness box and also give answers. Is it possible for Parliament to do all those things? Obviously not. That is the reason why we say that Parliament's control over administration is no substitute for control over administration. It is absolutely no substitute. Only complement, but it cannot substitute. Next, in India, yes? Any doubt? Okay. In India, for the upliftment of the majority of people, governmental intervention remains a central fact of life. Nevertheless, the effective implementation of policies depends on the ethical values of public servants. Discuss. The question was supposed to be given in ethics paper, and they have given wrongly in public administration. And same kind of answer in ethics paper. Similar question was asked. You write, Mr. UPSC, please refer to my answer in ethics paper, question number 7, part 2. Give me marks also. God bless you. Right? So that is what. Otherwise, the same question. Governmental intervention remains a central fact of life. Right? Nevertheless, the effective implementation of policy depends on the ethical values of public servants. Discuss. So, why governmental intervention remains a central fact of life? Why? Because even now also, take the case of Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. 83 crore people are receiving food grains. If the government had not intervened in their life during the corona crisis, all of them would have faced a severe crisis in their life. Majority of people in our country are not a part of what we call market forces. They are not part of market forces. What does it mean? They don't have the money to buy goods and services from the markets. On top of it, during the corona crisis, we have seen a huge number of people also have lost their jobs. Unemployment also had gone up. And people are depending on the government for their food, shelter, education, health, sanitation, housing, and everything else. All their basic needs they are able to fulfill only with governmental intervention. And this is where the role of bureaucracy comes into picture. Why? Because bureaucracy is expected to make sure that the welfare policies formulated by the government, the benefits of those policies would reach the lowest sections of society. And there's 2 things here. One is benefits reaching them. Second, timely delivery of those benefits. Third thing is that they must ensure that there is no corruption. There should not be any misallocation of resources. There should not be any misuse of those resources. This is where the role of bureaucracy becomes very important. And this is where we talk about ethical values of public servants. So what are the ethical values that we are talking about here? That public servants must possess to make sure that they ensure effective delivery of effective services to the people. All the things that you study in your ethics paper. Honesty, integrity, selflessness, empathy, commitment to weaker sections of society, welfare of weaker sections of society. Then Next, love and affection towards weaker sections of society, right? Then outcome orientation. Then we need them to be proactive, innovative, dynamic, responsive. This is what Kiran, this Mission Karma Yogi talks about. Mission Karma Yogi says that we want to transform our bureaucracy into proactive, dynamic, innovative, creative, responsive, honest, empathetic, transparent, accountable, efficient. If you have all these values, you will be called God. I don't think even gods also have all these values. Some of them definitely don't have. Right? So that is what we say. And you have to write about all these values, why they are important. Right? You can write as many stories as you want for these kind of questions. You talk about implementation of NREGA. You say that timely delivery of wages with the help of social audit committees to reduce scope for any kind of corruption. You talk about implementation of PMJAY, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Focus on qualitative healthcare services by improving primary healthcare centers in your districts as a district collector. You talk about Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, focusing on improving the physical infrastructure in the schools. You talk about the midday meal schemes, expand the scope of midday meal schemes like Tamil Nadu has done, provide breakfast also to children, or as we discussed, innovative, let there be community kitchens. These are all the things that you have to write. Take all these values and give the example of a specific scheme, how these values can help you to ensure that the benefits of the scheme would be received by the targeted beneficiaries. You can write all of them. CAG today is a primary cause of widespread and paralyzing unwillingness on the part of the government institutions to decide and discuss. That means the question says that CAG is ultimately responsible for policy paralysis in administration. That is what the question says. Do we agree with the question? We don't agree. Why? Because as we discussed, there was policy paralysis in administration previously, not because of CAG activism, but because of the political circumstances prevailing in the country. There was coalition government. In a coalition government, what we have witnessed is the government becoming a soft state, unwilling to take tough decisions. And the blame was CAG or judiciary or civil society organizations or media. So it is not CAG's activism that led to policy paralysis in administration. We don't agree. On the other hand, what we require is a more proactive CAG. Give the example, in the last 8 years, we have seen so many tough decisions taken. We also have seen so many tough decisions taken by the bureaucracy. They did not be controversial because they have followed what we call good governance practices. Give the example of this privatization of Indian Airlines, Air India. There was absolutely no controversy because everything was done in a highly accountable and efficient manner. So that is the reason why CAG also need not interfere here. Then give the examples of the DBT, direct benefit transfer. Money is directly being credited into the accounts of the people. There is no scope for CAG coming to picture here because you know the money is credited or not. So to say that a CAG is responsible for policy paralysis is completely wrong. On top of it, as we discussed in our class, the government also has amended Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. Section 13(1)(d) and 13(1)(e) also were amended to give more protection to bureaucracy to take decisions also. On the other hand, what we have to talk about is we have to make CAG more effective. How? Let there be concurrent audit. Let there be outcome budgets. Let 1971 CAG Act be amended. All those reforms that we have discussed in our class You have to write. So we don't agree with this statement, right? Next, do you think that the new localism relegate the spirit of 74th Constitutional Amendment Act 1992? Every year the same question will be asked, right? Obviously we don't agree. New localism expands the scope of governance at the local level. 1992 Constitutional Amendment Act 74 had only resulted in what we call old localism, which led to politicization of development process at the local level. It led to massive levels of corruption in urban local bodies. It only resulted in representative democracy. It did not lead to participative democracy. At least in 73rd Amendment you have Gram Sabhas. Do you have any similar arrangement at the urban level, like ward Sabhas or something like that? No, we don't have any. We don't have any neighborhood management committees also. This 1992 74th Amendment Act has only resulted in old localism, politicization of development process, massive levels of corruption and unholy nexus between the people elected representatives at the local level and the bureaucracy and the contractors. And that is the reason why we are talking about new localism, to expand the scope of governance, to end the monopoly of political executive and bureaucracy over governance at the local level. And that is the reason why, as part of new localism, we are talking about bringing everyone into governance at the local level. Civil society organizations, NGOs, beneficiary associations, and then neighborhood committees, and local self-governments, private sector, public-private partnerships. Everyone should be brought into governance, so that you give, you ensure citizen-centric governance at the local level also. And that is the reason why in Western countries like United Kingdom and other European countries, they have experimented with neighborhood committees, as we have discussed in our class, wherein instead of giving it to the entire power to the political executive, give the power to the people at the local level. In the United States of America, as we have discussed, they have opted for council manager form of government, right, as part of new localism. You have to write all of them, right? Next, the main objective of Panchayat's extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996 is to enable tribal society to assume control over their livelihoods and traditional rights. Critically examine the implementation of the act. UPSC made a drastic change here. I have given this question in polity governance paper, and they have given it in Indian administration. The kind of revolutionary changes UPSC is making in their, this year, those who have attended our GS test series have given the same question in polity governance paper, and they have given it in Indian administration. So what is this Panchayat extension of Panchayat to Scheduled Areas Act 1996? In 1992, it was said that this 73rd Amendment is applicable only to Panchayats but not to scheduled areas, scheduled tribes and scheduled areas. There are so many areas in our country which are part of these scheduled areas. Articles 5 and 6 of our constitution talk about those administration of scheduled areas, if you remember, if you know. So the government has come out with this PISA Act in 1996. So what the objective is? The objective is to provide democratic governance in tribal areas. Democratic governance in tribal areas, right? Why? Because 73rd Amendment was restricted only to normal panchayats, but not to tribal areas, right? And what are the important features of this PISA? First, it had given absolute powers to Gram Sabha. Absolute powers to Gram Sabha. The role of the state legislature is only advisory role. The role of the state legislature is only advisory in nature. That means state governments would be providing suggestions to the Gram Sabhas in these scheduled areas in terms of governance. Otherwise, these Gram Sabhas have absolute sovereign power. And these powers given to Gram Sabhas cannot be reduced or curtailed by state governments, because there is every possibility that you pass a legislation, tomorrow the state government will come out with another legislation to curtail the powers of this legislation. That is the reason why, as part of this PISA Act, Parliament has clearly mentioned that the state governments cannot curtail the powers of these Gram Sabhas. And what are the powers these Gram Sabhas have? All the things that we study with regular Gram Sabhas. They have the power to approve plans and programs and projects, these Gram Sabhas. They have the power to safeguard their traditions and customs, tribal areas. They have the power to safeguard their traditions and customs. They have the power to identify the beneficiaries of welfare schemes. And they have also the power to approve utilization certificates of Gram Sabhas. Once the money is spent, utilization certificate is given. Then they also have the power to reserve seats for scheduled tribes. And they also have the power for land acquisition. If you remember, this is what we have discussed. Land acquisition had become problematic, especially in tribal areas, because these Gram Sabhas had been given the power to decide on land acquisition. And what was the problem here? These NGOs and civil society organizations, they would go to those areas, our Mehta Patkars and Arundhati Roys, they would go to the tribal areas, they will sing, dance, eat, cry, sleep, and they will oppose all these projects. They will tell the tribals that poverty is your birthright and will make sure that you shall have it. Right? That is where new localism also had come into existence, as we discussed. So this is what we say. As I said, they have the power to acquire land. They also the power to decide on rehabilitation and resettlement of people. And they have the power to protect and promote their beliefs and traditions and customs, especially in states like northeastern states. There the state governments cannot interfere. In some of these northeastern states, in tribal councils, they do not have even women members also. Why? Because that is part of their traditions in Nagaland. You cannot say that this is what central government law. They can have their own traditions and customs also. So this is what basically PISA. And what are the major issues related to PISA? That is what we have to discuss also, critically examine. So what are the major issues? Right? First and foremost, state governments were expected to enact a legislation. They were supposed to enact a legislation in consonance with national law. They were supposed to enact a legislation in consonance with national law. But most of the state governments have only partially implemented PISA. They have used this loophole. They have only partially implemented PISA. And this partial implementation has led to worsening of governance in tribal areas. Why? Because state governments do not want to lose power. Very simple. This partial implementation has led to worsening of governance. Governance has become worsened. WORSENING. Right? In these tribal areas, especially in states like Jharkhand, the tribals were not given any real powers. Why? Because Jharkhand has huge amount of natural resources. So the state government would exploit all those natural resources without the consent of these Gram Sabhas also. So they were asked to leave those places. There were no proper rehabilitation measures. They were not given any proper compensation also. That is where the problem is. Next, there is a lack of clarity, absence of clarity, bureaucratic apathy. Bureaucracy is not willing to implement it. APATHY. Absence of political will. Resistance to decentralized power. Resistance to decentralization of power. Legal complications. all of them combined together led to ineffective implementation of PISA. All of them led to ineffective implementation of PISA, right? And in most of the states, when the social audit was conducted, in most of the states, when social audit was conducted, Gram Sabha approved all the schemes and projects without any meeting also. Gram Sabha has approved all the schemes and projects. They have approved all the decisions without any meeting also, especially in states like Jharkhand. The tribal councils, they have to give their permission for exploration of natural resources. That is when the Gram Sabha should meet and take the decisions. On paper, it was said that the Gram Sabha met and took the decision. In reality, when the social audit was done, it was found out that they never met also. And another problem is that lot of corruption also. Why? Because most of these tribals, they are innocent. They don't even know the benefits that they are supposed to receive. So in the name of, especially these are things that happened in Jharkhand, because most of our students are posted in Jharkhand also, they keep on telling me. Why? Because nobody will go deep interior into the forest. So the middlemen who were there, they siphon off all the funds. And they will give the utilization certificates to their superiors. And the villagers, the tribals simply don't even know the programs that are being implemented. The welfare schemes that, the benefit that they are supposed to receive also. Because most of them are illiterate, poor. And this is where PISA has been a failure. Why? Because this PISA is supposed to create awareness among the tribals about their rights, about their welfare. Unfortunately, it was not done. Why? Because of all the reasons that we have given. Right? So this is what you have to write, and then of course, you know what you have to write as part of solutions. First and foremost, creating awareness. You must create awareness among the people. The most important thing is create awareness. For any of these structural reforms to be successful, you must create awareness among the beneficiaries, stakeholders. No state government has really bothered to use advertisement campaign to create awareness. Civil society organizations and NGOs are also not very active in these tribal areas. You need to create awareness. Then, state government should not be given any freedom in terms of coming out with their own laws. When the PISA is there, central government must say that every state government has to come out with the law exactly on the same lines of PISA. Right now what is happening is that every state government has diluted most of the provisions of PISA. And that is the reason why what we are saying is that let the state governments be not given any kind of freedom, dilute the provisions of PISA. Third thing what we say here is that let there be awareness among the people about the welfare schemes and the beneficiaries. And fourth thing as we say is that, as we discussed also, let there be regular meetings of Gram Sabhas, at least 3 times in a year. In tribal areas, they have free time like you people. 24 hours they have free. Right? Anytime you can have Gram Sabha meeting. Like whenever I say that we have class today, this time you will come. Completely free. Right? So, of course, I will also include myself also. Because with due respect to our leader Rahul Gandhi, all of us are free only. Right? So that is the reason why right now he is on a walking spree. So this is what you have to write for PISA. Next, the effectiveness of law and order administration depends on the cooperative attitudes of people towards police than bringing reforms in the structure and procedure of law and order machinery. Do you agree? I have given the same question in my test series this year. Right? Same question. Right? Do you agree? Give your results. Obviously, we agree. Right? Police reforms have not been successful. Why? Because 2006 Supreme Court judgment in police reforms. 15 years, more than 15 years. 22nd September 2006. That is the reason why if you look at 22nd September newspapers, Hindu or Indian Express, everyone, they have written nostalgically about 2006 judgment of Supreme Court. Prakash Singh versus Union of India. So why? What is the reason why we have not been able to bring about changes in the structure as well as the procedures as well as the laws, rules and regulations that influence the functioning of police forces in our country? Even after 75 years of independence, when our Prime Minister talks about shedding the colonial past, it is not about renaming Rajpada as Kartavyapad, Rajasthan as Kartavistan. That is not what we are looking for. In any place Raj is there, replace with Kartavya. In Google, you go to Google search and then find and replace Raj with Kartavya or Raj Yog with Kartavyog. Then that is not what we are looking for. What we are looking for is the most dreaded colonial institution which is still being continued now is police. We have not been able to change the structure, the procedures, behavior, values of police forces in India in the last 75 years. British have deliberately introduced what is called Irish police in India, whereas in their country it is completely different. In London, in UK, it is called police service. Police was called a service just like revenue services, judicial services. Police is also called a service. Whereas in India, it was called police force. In those countries, if you go to UK, as I have said, I have seen their police are so good there. They are really good. They are so very courteous. They will be very, very civilized in terms of their behavior. Of course, they are also useless there like this also. But at least they are inefficient and they are good. In India, they are bad and they are inefficient. Right? In those countries, the moment you have any problem, immediately you call the police. In India, if you want any problem, you call the police. Right? How many of you, as I asked the question, almost stayed in a police station in the middle of the night? Midnight police station lockup? You were there. I am talking about lockup. You were there in lockup? No. Outside. I am asking how many of you have seen our police stations in the middle of the night? Have you seen? How do they function? Police will be on high and you can see them using all kinds of degrees, 3rd degree, 4th degree, 10th degree on the criminals who were there in the lockup. You can see very brutal force being used by the police. What is the reason why? Why? Because we have inherited colonial police force. That is the reason why British called it as force, not as a service. Revenue service, police was called a force. That is the reason why second ERC, in its report on public order, has said that first let us change the name of the police. Let us replace the word force with service, so that people have some kind of better respect for police forces. In India, unfortunately, the functioning of the police is always dictated by the social status of a person. If you are a rich person, you go to a police station and you will get best treatment. On the other hand, if you are a poor person, you go to a police station to file a FIR, immediately they will file FIR against you. Discrimination is there. That is the reason why poor people in India always think that police are a force that are there only to protect and promote the interests of rich and powerful sections of society. Under those circumstances, any amount of structural reforms will not help you. Why? Because you need to change the attitudes, you need to change the values, you need to change the behaviors of a police force in our country. You need to provide a sensitivity training to police forces. If you go to this Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy, Hyderabad, the training mostly focuses on imparting skills in terms of criminal law, civil laws, IPC, everything else, and of course giving training in weapons from AK-47 to everything else. But what is conspicuous by its absence is training in human values, what we call it as sensitivity training. That is the reason why the moment they come out of these training academies, they become so ruthless. Unfortunately, even young police officers also. And of course, at the lowest level, from a constable to the SHO, no training is given in terms of what we call human values, sensitivity training, human rights. That is the reason why these fake encounters become part of day-to-day functioning of police. If you go back during the Corona times, if you remember, there was an incident in Tamil Nadu. When this lockdown was going on, a person, during relaxation times, he was taken to police station. He was beaten so severely that he died there itself. Nothing happened. Nothing will happen. Why? Because these lockup deaths are a part of a common functioning of our police forces. Similarly, as we study also, there are so many crimes that are committed by the police forces, kidnappings. And there was this, one of our students only, his senior, Agra cantonment at that area. There was his superior in states like UP and Bihar. You have SSP, Senior Superintendent of Police, above SP. And Akhilesh Yadav was the Chief Minister. And he got all the Yadav officers, police officers posted in different parts of the country, come to Uttar Pradesh and work there, Yadav community. On deputation they had come. And this SSP, he had earned in 1 year itself around 200 crores. Very simple. Massive corruption. And take the case of these places like in Noida, where you want to go to be a police commissioner there. Mayawati has sold these kind of DM and police commissioner positions in places like Noida and all these places, 5 crores. And these police officers, young police officers, were willing to pay 5 crores to get those prize postings. Why? Because they know they can earn that money within 1 week with their sincerity, honesty, commitment and everything else. This is where we need changes in the functioning of police force. That is what the question says. Cooperative attitudes. Why people do not go? As we say, as we study, community policing in India has been a failure. Community policing means, this is what second ERC also says. Every citizen is a police without uniform. Every police is a criminal with uniform. Now that the second part is not there. The first part is there. Every citizen is a police without uniform. So people are expected to approach the police, provide information about the movement of anti-social elements in their area. That is what we call developing human intelligence at the ground level. Why the people do not go to the police stations? Why? Because the attitude of the police. The kind of image that the police have in the eyes of the people, especially poor people. Why? Because police always believe that poor people always are invariably criminals only. So with this kind of attitude, any amount of structural reforms or procedural reforms or legal reforms cannot be sufficient. So what is required is we need to change attitudes and values of police personnel. This is where we study in law and order administration that district collector should play a very important role. Why? Because at the district level, the district collector or district magistrate is the head of, the superintendent of police will work under the control and guidance of the district collector. District collector enjoys more better relation with the people. He should take initiative and he should form neighborhood committees and he should ensure that there is proper coordination between the police and the citizens of that area so that community police can also be successful. And for this we need radical changes in the attitudes and values and behaviors of police personnel. That can be done by increasing awareness among the people about their rights. That can also be done by having effective grievance redressal mechanisms. In case of any police commits any kind of crimes, like what are the crimes mentioned? Kidnapping and illegal detention, then demanding money, corruption, and then lockup deaths, right? These are all the crimes committed by the police. If there is an effective grievance redressal mechanism for people, then it also helps in ensuring better cooperation between the police and the citizens. Why? Because people know that there is no point in going to police stations to file FIRs. Right now we have these EFIRs, as we discussed in e-governance. Does it mean that you have achieved good governance? Not. Why? Because filing EFIR does not mean the case is being solved. We need the police to investigate. And the basic problem for the police in India is that we don't have any separation between law and order and crime investigation. Crimes are getting highly sophisticated. Police simply do not have the skills to investigate those crimes, financial crimes, cyber crimes. They don't have the skills, and we need to separate all of them. We have to take all these measures at the end of the day to ensure better cooperation between the citizens and police. And first and foremost, as the second ERC says, replace the word force with service, and change their dress also. The dress is also looks very dreadful, right? You go to foreign countries, they are more civilized. That is what you can say at the end of the day. It does not mean that there are no crimes committed by the police there. There also they have committed crimes, like in United States of America, you can see racial crimes, right? Next, examine the role of Lokpal in ensuring transparency and accountability in Indian administration. So this is what we have discussed. Lokpal had come into existence to prevent political and administrative corruption at the topmost level. But after 2013, when the Lokpal bill was passed, it had taken another around 6-7 years for the government to appoint members to Lokpal bill. Even now also the government had not defined the functions of this Lokpal institution. So can Lokpal help in removing corruption? Can Lokpal help in ensuring transparency and accountability in administration? One institution, howsoever powerful it may be, cannot ensure transparency or accountability, cannot remove corruption. Why? Why? As we have discussed, corruption is systemic and systematic in nature. So to ensure transparency and accountability, we need to implement other governance reforms, RTI, to ensure complete transparency. To ensure accountability, we need citizen charters, we need social audits, we need effective grievance redressal mechanisms. Along with this, we can have Lokpal. Lokpal can complement other governance reforms, but cannot be a substitute for any other reform. That is what we say. Why? Because corruption is systemic and systematic in nature, and that is the reason why we need multi-dimensional reforms. Lokpal is one of those reforms, and we have to make Lokpal effective also by defining its powers in a more concrete manner. Why? Because till now we don't know whether Lokpal is functioning or also not. Till now it is not even functioning. So this is what about the question paper. As you can see, it is not that much difficult. If you are good with your current affairs and basic Indian polity, you can answer all the questions, right? And I'm sure those who have written mains, they can score at least 160, 170 marks also, if they write well, because the question paper is not difficult. What you must do, as I keep on saying, is practice the previous year's questions. Almost every question was asked in previous years only. Every question was asked in previous years. Sometimes they have repeated the questions with the spelling mistakes also to ensure consistency. Otherwise, they will change the question, framing the question. For example, Lokpal also was picked up from previous years only. What was the question? A strong, a Lokpal, howsoever strong may be, cannot remove corruption. The same question was given here now. A Lokpal institution, howsoever strong it may be, cannot tackle the menace of corruption. The same question was repeated now. Instead of corruption, they said transparency and accountability. So that is what you have to remember. Make sure that you are revising previous year questions and also be thorough with current affairs. Very important. That is what is required. Right? So that is it, and best of luck. Right? Any doubts you can ask. Tomorrow you have class, our regular class will be there at the same time. Pardon? I did not get you. You can take holiday, no problem. Rest of them will come. As I said, you will have holiday after you get into services for the next 35 years. Get into IAS, holiday every day. Paid holiday. 11:30. 11:30. Huh? Because we have not informed everyone. We can start current affairs later. Right. Tomorrow the class timing is the same, 11:30 to 2. Same person also. Right? You don't have any option. Right?